Hey, everybody, this is Jesse Dayton, and you are listening to my weekly mixtape with none other than Brian Colbert.
Welcome to My Weekly Mixtape, a podcast that takes the classic mixtape approach to building a modern playlist. I'm your host, Brian Colburn. Joining me tonight from the road is guest curator Jesse Dayton. Jesse, thank you so much for joining me on My Weekly Mixtape.
Great to be here, man.
Well, I'd like to start by asking you my first time guest question, and that is, Jesse, what does the word mixtape mean to you?
Well, of course, I am old enough to remember those, and I made them. And the mixtapes were a really interesting way to find out, like, if people were cool or not. You know, it was like looking at their record collection, but later that we would just record stuff. I mean, mixtapes for me, I was always all over the place because I've never subscribed to one genre fully, even though I'm a nerd and spent 10,000 hours in each one of them. And as not only a record collector, but a player. But the mixtapes for me, what it really means to me is it lets me know who you are. But I can remember, going and buying 4 of the packaged ones and busting the little tabs off and putting, recording stuff off the radio. And it was a thing, and now my son who's, does the playlist. I mean, that's his version of it.
Yep. Well, tonight, our topic is something that's going to cover that wide variety of genres that you talked about just now, and that is guitar solos. That is such a wide open topic. So for a guitarist like yourself, what were you looking for in the guitar solos that you're bringing to the table this evening?
I mean, basically, I'm always looking for, I look at guitar solos like a great book. Like, there needs to be a really good entrance. There needs to be the middle thing, needs to be the meat and heart of the matter, whether that's melody or shredding or just sad or happy playing, just very emotive playing. And then an exit that's like undeniable. And it was it's a really tough thing, man, because those 20 solos could change like every 5 minutes. So I just kind of had to commit and just go with what I thought was groundbreaking historically for me.
So let's get down to business. Tonight, as I mentioned, Jesse and I will be curating the ultimate guitar solos mixtape, and we'll use the old cassette deck approach. Jesse, as my special guest, will begin side A with his first song choice, and then I'll add a song that I feel best follows up that choice. We'll then flip-flop choosing songs until we've mapped out 10 songs for side A. We'll then give our mixtape a proverbial flip, and we'll map out side B, only this time I'll kick things off with Jesse choosing second. Our overall goal for the episode is to craft the best guitar solos mixtape possible through only 20 songs. And at the end of the show, you can take our conversation to the next level by visiting the episode page at myweeklymixtape.com to give our final mixtape a listen via the embedded playlist. And if you like what you're hearing on the show, you can help me out by either telling a friend, leaving the show a 5-star review wherever you're tuning in, or becoming a Patreon mixtaper at patreon.com/My Weekly Mixtape. There you can enjoy ad-free episodes of the show, become a future guest, and so much more. And a few of the Patreon mixtapers chimed in with the songs they would use to kick off a guitar solos mixtape, and I'd like to give a quick shout out to a few of those. Jen Fink chimed in with Angus Young from AC/DC, Back in Black, Prince's Purple Rain, Slash from Guns N' Roses on Sweet Child of Mine, and Anything from Jimi Hendrix or Stevie Ray Vaughan. Seeker chimed in with Adrian Smith from Iron Maiden's 2 Minutes to Midnight with zero disrespect to Dave Murray. Sean Goff chimed in with Nuno Betancourt from Extreme's Get the Funk Out, saying Nuno is so much more than words. Chad Lamassa chimed in with Tom Morello from Rage Against the Machine in Killing of the Name. Mike Daly chimed in with Mark Tremonti from Alter Bridge's Ties That Bind. Cactus Pete also chimed in with Mark Tremonti, only he chose Fortress, along with Vito Bratta from White Lion's Little Fighter and Eddie Van Halen from Van Halen's Feelin'. Philip Bergman also chimed in with Eddie Van Halen, only he went with Eruption, as well as Jeff Skunk Baxter from Donna Summer's Hot Stuff, saying the solo on that record is just as searing as about any arena rock song that came out around the same time. Tom Hutchinson chimed in with Dimebag Darrell from Pantera and Walk, and Jason Donchis chimed in with Mark Ford from the Black Crowes' Sometimes Salvation, along with Rich Robinson's solo from their track I Ain't Hiding. Once again, if you'd like to join the Patreon Mixtaper family and chime in for future episodes of the show, you can do so at patreon.com/myweeklymixtape.
Hello, Pantheon Podcast listeners. Christian Swain here to tell you more about my experience with Raycon earbuds. Our family now has 3 pairs of Raycon earbuds around the house, and my wife just grabbed a pair of the Headphone Pros to replace some headphones from a company that was double the price. And yes, she loves them. Now, if you haven't pulled the trigger on a pair of Raycons, or even if you have but you're in the market for another pair because they're just that good, well, now is the time to check them out, because they just launched their upgraded model of the best-selling everyday earbuds. With Raycon's upgraded everyday earbuds, now you also get active noise cancellation, ergonomic design, and multi-point connectivity that lets you pair with 2 devices at once. New quick charge function, 3 customizable sound styles, plus awareness mode. Available in a variety of vibrant new colors to complement any and all skin tones. I even have a pair of earbuds in a cool green color. I have tried just about every earbud known to humankind, and these Raycons are fantastic. Seriously, if you've been wanting to check out Raycons, there truly is no better time. You're going to ask yourself why you didn't check them out sooner, and Raycon offers a 30-day happiness guarantee. So what are you waiting for? Go to buyraycon.com/Pantheon today to get 20% off your Raycon order, plus free shipping. That's right, you'll get 20% off and free shipping at buyraycon.com/Pantheon. buyraycon.com/Pantheon.
Hey, it's Kaylee Cuoco for Priceline. Ready to go to your happy place for a happy price? Well, why didn't you say so? Just download the Priceline app right now and save up to 60% on hotels. So whether it's Cousin Kevin's Kazoo Concert in Kansas City, go Kevin, or Becky's Bachelorette Bash in Bermuda, you never have to miss a trip ever again. So download the Priceline app today. Your savings are waiting.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
With that said, Jesse, I'm officially going to press the record button on our mixtape and turn things over to you. What song would you like to use to kick off our Ultimate Guitar Solos playlist?
Well, I mean, we could start with Hendrix. The thing about Hendrix is I have this theory that, like, if you're born after a certain period of time, like if you were born early around the time that Jimmy was born, whatever that was in the late 40s, early 50s, then for me, you have a true outlet out as far as not being influenced, or some would say corrupted, by Jimi Hendrix's guitar playing. But if you were not born then and you were born afterwards and you're a guitar player and you never went through a Hendrix phase, I am very suspicious of you. So we're going to keep our eye on that guy. Okay.
So which song by Jimmy are you going to put to kick things off then?
Well, there's so many great ones. I mean, I love the solo on Wind Cries Mary. It's just because it's got all this magical stuff all over it with the slide, and there's so much great stuff. I mean, of course, Voodoo Child, but we've all heard that a million times. And so I think we're going to go with Room Full of Mirrors.
Wow. All right.
Because it's still got the funky R&B thing that he's taken into this psychedelic groove thing. He took all these licks that he did when he was playing with King Curtis and Little Richard, and he was doing these, playing in these R&B and funk bands, and he took them and just revved them up into this rock thing, and no one had ever done that before. So it was groundbreaking, and he influenced everyone who came after him.
Could not agree more. I had 1967's Are You Experienced on my list. I had Red House because for me, when my father first introduced me to his Smash Hits 8-track cassette at the time. We then ended up getting it on CD when I made the transition. The first song he wanted me to hear by Jimi Hendrix was Red House. And the reason was, at least in his mind, he said, the blues doesn't get better than this. This is what got me into the blues as far as my father, and it got me into the blues as well.
Absolutely. I agree with that. And Red House is so just genre defining, important, so important. And it got so many people into the blues. And she doesn't want me. I know her sister will too. You know, I mean, that's as cool as it gets, man. So
that's boss level songwriting right there. Yeah. Well, I'm going to come off of Jimi Hendrix using the groove that you went with from Room Full of Mirrors. Plus, kudos for going with something off of Rainbow Bridge, because to me, Rainbow Bridge is always going to be that album of what might have been had he not passed.
Yeah.
But I'm going to stick with the groove part of it. And I'm going to come up a couple of decades and go with a song that I feel like groove-wise, with a guitar solo, was such a masterful play on taking rock and R&B and blues and everything else and kind of just throwing it into a pot and kind of making your own thing. And that's the title track from 1984's Purple Rain and Prince.
Oh, wow.
That guitar solo, just every time he kicks into it, you're taken on this half a song adventure.
Yes.
And lyrically, the song is powerful, it's strong, but by the time the guitar kicks in, it just takes you over and it commands your attention. And Prince is one of those guitarists that I think by the time he did the Super Bowl halftime show, I think a lot of people truly realized what a guitar player he was. And I feel like up until that point, he was always very popular, always selling out concerts. But I don't think people thought of him as a guitar player as much as a songwriter, as well as a jack of all trades when it comes to playing instruments. And I think Purple Rain is the argument for that.
Absolutely, because Purple Rain came out. I saw him on that tour, by the way, and I'm a huge fan. And I saw him do that. And we always knew that he was a great guitar player, but he was looked more like this multi-instrumental genius type than he was like this guitar hero. And I'll tell you what really changed the tide for a lot of people is when he walked out on that Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and played guitar with Tom Petty doing the George Harrison song, and then throws the guitar up in the air at the end of it. This guy catches it, but it was such an emotional guitar part.
And I'll be perfectly honest, I was flipping a coin between the two, and I just didn't know if I wanted to go with the number 2 spot with a cover song. But that performance is mind-blowing, and there's a reason it's got like a bajillion views on YouTube. That was an iconic and, dare I say, important performance in music history, especially given the fact that some of those players are no longer with us. So following up Jimi Hendrix and Prince, where do we go from here?
Well, let's take a big turn. Let's do something different. I mean, we could stay in Bluesville and Rockville or whatever, but there was an incredible guitar player named Django Reinhardt. And Django Reinhardt was this gypsy who started out playing American jazz music in cafes around France and Belgium. And he is a monster guitar player. And if you go to guys that are kind of heavy cats, whether it's, I mean, you name it, from, you know, Randy Rhoads was a big fan, all the jazz guys that you can imagine, you know, and these jazz guys, a lot of these jazz guys that worship Django are, you know, they're ungodly players. I mean, they're just doing things that people in rock and roll and blues aren't, in terms of like moving the form around and just pushing the boundaries. But Django, he was in a fire when he was a kid. He lost one of his fingers, so he only plays with 3 fingers. But if you listen to Django Reinhardt, he's like Willie Nelson's favorite guitar player. He's like a lot of the country guys who are super hot chicken picking guys who could really burn up a neck. They're all into Django. So Django has had this amazing effect in all these genres, from heavy metal to country to swing to jazz to blues. They're just deep into the guy. So anyway, this song's called You Rascal You, and it's just him and an upright bass in a stripped down band playing in a cafe in France. And he sounds like he's having a conversation on his guitar with the other musicians. And that's a rare thing, because most of the time when guitar players play, you hear like, okay, everybody look at me. You know, it's the whole thing like, hey, everybody, I've been working on this a long time and I'm about to blow your mind, which is cool. But this is more like, by the way, let me tell you some things and get some stuff off my chest and have this conversation. So anyway, it's a swinging track.
Unbelievable guitar player. The fact that he does that minus one of the key tools to play a guitar, and he's at that level. It's almost like a pre-Jerry Garcia, because it's pretty well known that Jerry was missing a finger as well, but kind of a different style and different time of playing back when Django was cutting his teeth musically.
Absolutely. And Django kept jazz guitar and swing guitar, which would eventually become rock and roll guitar. You know, he kept all that alive. It's interesting you say Jerry Garcia, because I was telling a friend of mine the other day, I'll take a quick derail, just 2 seconds here. I was telling a friend of mine that Jerry Garcia started out as a bluegrass banjo player.
Mm-hmm.
And I have this theory, which isn't very popular with purists, but their feelings aren't facts. So what I'm saying is facts. In the 70s, when the Dead would take a break, Jerry would go out with his bluegrass band. And these promoters would book him. And this is at a time when all of the bluegrass guys were still alive. Jimmy Martin, Bill Monroe, all those guys, they were all still alive, but they were getting diminishing returns unless they were playing with the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band or they were playing the Newport Folk Festival. Their shows were not heavily attended. And bluegrass was in a real dire straits, was dying. But Jerry would go out and play bluegrass, and thousands upon thousands of kids would show up. And I think Jerry single-handedly saved bluegrass music concerts.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's a big deal. But I think that back to Django, I think Django kind of did that too, because, you know, he was playing this kind of, if you listen to this track, it's so aggressive. You know, it's not like, hey, let's lay back and cross our legs and play some sophisticated stuff. And, you know, it like, you know, any shredder worth their weight in gold could sit down and listen to this and go, wow, this guy's on fire.
Mm-hmm. What I think I'm going to follow that up with, I think I'm going to lean into the jazz side of things. I'm going to come up a couple of decades, but I'm going to go with, I am self-proclaimed, quote unquote, new to jazz. I've always had an affinity for it, but it's been the last 10 years that I really started going down a jazz rabbit hole. And one of the first albums that helped me make that transition was 1963's Midnight Blue. And the reason I went with that album is in 1991, Stevie Ray Vaughan had put out a posthumous release when he had passed away called The Sky is Crying. And on it, he covered one of Kenny Burrell's songs, Chitlin's Concarney. And I fell in love with the song. And when I realized it was a cover, I went and bought Midnight Blue, and this whole new genre of music was introduced to me.
Right.
I think Kenny Burrell is one of those guitarists that truly helped bridge jazz, blues, and rock together. And I feel like Midnight Blue is one of those albums that if someone says to me, drop a top 5 jazz albums of all time, this is definitely in there. Possibly, for me, it's top 3. I just think from guitar-based jazz, it doesn't get any better than Kenny. So I'm going to go with Chitlin's Concarney here.
Yeah, he's a monster. The guy's a monster. He's a great player. And that's so cool that you brought that up, because Stevie was listening to that stuff, you know, and just kind of a similar aggressive attack in the way they play guitar, and not the same player at all, you know, especially tonally, it's totally different. But yeah, man, I think people like Stevie and these really heavy blues guys, they look towards some of these jazz guys to try to like kind of expand their thing because they're always wanting to get outside of what they're doing. I mean, I don't know. I'd like to see more players do that.
Well, following up Kenny Burrell, where do we go from here?
Well, I'm saying like, let's go back to the blues on this one. We really haven't picked a full on blues thing. Well, we did Red House, I guess I don't know. We did a Hendrix song.
Yeah. Room Full of Mirrors is what you went with for that. So
yeah. But let's go way out. And, if you go to Otis Rush, there's a player named Otis Rush. And if you want to really get your mind blown, go on YouTube and look up a video of him doing I Can't Quit You, Babe. And it's the song that, is one of the seminal songs on the first Led Zeppelin record. But it's Otis Rush is doing the original version of it. And he's singing his guts out. I mean, it's not your typical like manly Otis Redding kind of like, I'm going to show you how manly I am. It's a guy who has a range that is like mind-blowing great. And his guitar playing, he's playing this 335 and he's playing it on a curly cord that's plugged directly into like a Silverface Fender amp. And anyway, the song's called All Your Love. And it's really cool because it turns the beat around like from the verses to the chorus. And it kind of goes from the samba beat, which is real Latin-y beat, into this swing thing. And when it starts swinging, you could kind of tell like where these bands were getting all this stuff. This is before Cream, it's before Zeppelin, it's all that stuff, It's like when you listen to Freddie King doing I'm Going Down.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, well, this is a better version of what those bands would go on to do. Or maybe not better, but pure version, So anyway, I go with Otis Rush because I can't think we can't understate the blues in this conversation. So
love it. Going back to 1956 with this one, you talked about the groups that Otis Rush influenced. And I have read that Peter Green originally said he was influenced by All Your Love when he wrote Santana's Black Magic Woman.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? It makes sense, though, doesn't it?
You think about those two styles of songs.
Super similar.
Right? It's that groove. I almost want to go with Santana's Black Magic Woman here because he is another.
Why not?
You know what? I think I am. I love Santana. He is such an amazing guitarist. He's done so much in rock. And he's stayed relevant throughout the decades when you go all the way up to his track Smooth with Rob Thomas. But then you go back in the 70s, he did a cover of John Coltrane's A Love Supreme. This guy covered the musical spectrum with ease. And Black Magic Woman coming out of All Your Love has a nice musical conversation going there. So let's do that.
Absolutely.
And coming out of that, we're up to track 7 and back to you.
Okay, so I'm going to go I got to meet Billy Gibbons when I was younger, and Billy Gibbons was a huge ZZ Top first 5 records were like the soundtrack to my life growing up in Texas, Louisiana border. And we were all just completely bowled over and in love with ZZ Top. And, a lot of kids, when you talk about ZZ Top to them, the first thing they think is this kind of 80s programmed hits and stuff like that. But really the first 5 records rival anything in rock and roll. I mean, men have jumped out of towers trying to get the tone that Billy Gibbons gets. But I'm not setting this up for Billy. I'm setting this up for Jeff Beck because I went and saw Jeff Beck 3 months before he passed away. And he was playing with ZZ Top in Houston. And I got backstage and I got to check out all of Jeff's gear, said hi real briefly. And then 3 months later, he was gone. But Jeff Beck came over. He had known Billy since Billy was a kid in a band called the Moving Sidewalks. And he gave Billy his first Marshall amp a long, long time ago. So they go way back. But Jeff was probably the in some ways the greatest electric guitar player in terms of just overall influence on people. And this is a tough one because Ain't Superstitious has a young Rod Stewart singing on it. Ron Wood is the bass player.
What a lineup. Oh my God.
And this is him doing his version of Howlin' Wolf. I really loved Because We've Ended as Lovers, which is an amazing thing. If the listeners want to go down an incredible experience, check out Jeff Beck live at, what's the name of the club?
Live at Ronnie Scott's with Tal Wilkenfeld on bass.
Yeah.
Absolutely mind-blowing rendition there.
Mind-blowing. And listen to them do A Day in the Life by the Beatles. And Jimmy Page is out in the crowd. He stands up and gives them the place only holds 100 people or whatever it is. And Jimmy Page is out in the audience giving them a standing O. But I have to go with Jeff Beck in terms of just being just incredibly important to the electric guitar.
So which song are we going to go with? Because We Ended as Lovers, or?
I think we should go with Ain't Superstitious, because the stuff that he does with a slide and a wah-wah pedal, I've never heard anyone do that since then.
I might low-key piss some people off with this one, but Truth might be my all-time favorite Jeff Beck album. I mean, that lineup of Rod Stewart, Mick Waller, Ronnie Wood, I mean, that's a musical home run. And then you think about tracks like Blues Deluxe, which Joe Bonamassa played in 2003, named an album after it. Beck's Bolero, their cover of You Shook Me. That whole album's just a chef's kiss. So I love the pick. But then thank you for mentioning Because We Ended as Lovers, because while Truth is my favorite Jeff Beck album, Because We Ended as Lovers is my favorite Jeff Beck song. And it's the version from Ronnie Scott's with Tal Wilkenfeld on bass. That just was a musical conversation that just blew my mind. Absolutely blew my mind.
Me too.
So Jeff Beck had a unique style of playing and a unique sound to his playing. I think we could have both agree on that, correct?
Yeah.
I'm going to bounce off of that. So musically, this is going to be a little bit of a jump, but from a uniqueness standpoint, I feel like it'd be tough to have this conversation without bringing this guitarist into the mix. And I'm actually going to go with a live version. As much as I love the self-titled Fleetwood Mac album, I'm going to go off of 1997's The Dance, and I'm going to go with Lindsey Buckingham in his guitar solo in I'm So Afraid.
Wow, man. Well, that's the similarity between him and Jeff Beck, is they weren't big pick guys, and the way they touched the strings was all about feel, and Lindsey had that for sure. I mean, if you put a gun to my head, if you say Fleetwood Mac, I'm always going to go with Peter Green, but I don't think that people understand how awesome Lindsey Buckingham is. I mean, he's got a super unique feel that as soon as you hear it, you immediately know it's him.
And there's a tone to his guitar, even in the later songs like Tusk, the guitar he's playing in the background, it just tonally cuts through the music in a way that I don't hear very often.
Yeah. Isn't it weird how, I remember when Tusk came out, I got to say, when it came out, I was a little bit dismissive of it. Yeah, I was just, because they were playing it all the time on the radio, and they had the marching band thing, and I was just kind of like, And then I go back later and I start listening to some of that Fleetwood Mac stuff, and I'm like, oh my God, this guy was very singular. He had an ultra unique tone and touch. And since then I've become a big Lindsey fan. I love what he does. So it's cool you're playing that.
All right. Well, we have one track left for you for side A. What do you have?
Man, I'm going to go, I haven't really done any country stuff on here, and I'm not going to on this one. Maybe I'll do it later, but I love, Jerry Reed and Grady Martin and these guys, because they were just so important to what certain aspects of rock and roll would become. But I'm going to just rev up to, I think is it 79 or 80? I'm going to go Randy Rhoads, Over the Mountain, and get into some heavy stuff. and just talk about, what a genius melody guy he was. And I recently, I was working on this film project in Hollywood, and we were in editing, and I was flying back and forth from Austin into LA, and I met Rudy Sarzo. We're both at the airport in what's the great little airport over there? It's not in Culver City, but it's not the LAX, it's the smaller one. I can't remember it, but it's a great little airport. It's like John Wayne or whatever, little 1960s airport. And next to me, waiting to get on the plane, is Rudy Sarzo. So I said, "Hey man, are you Rudy Sarzo?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Hey, I'm Jesse. I'm a huge fan. I'm a musician," and blah, blah, blah. So we just ended up sitting together because we were on a Southwest flight, so we could get any seats we wanted. And he literally told me the entire story of Randy Rhoads on the plane flight. This was before his book came out, Off the Rails. And he told me that every single one of those solos that Randy recorded on those Aussie records, he doubled.
Really?
Yeah, I was shocked. And if you go back and you listen to it, I was like, because I told him, I said, isn't it odd that when his solos come out, they attack you like nothing you've ever heard before, like even more so than Van Halen or any of those. There's only a few guitar players from that era that I'm crazy about. I'm really pre-metal guy. Like I like all the hard rock stuff. I'm a huge Thin Lizzy fan. I like all the early hard rock stuff. Love it, But Randy's leads would jump out and he goes, "That's because he doubled everything." And I was like, did he double it? Like, because you didn't have Pro Tools back then.
Right.
So that means that he had to figure out what he did on his own and sit there with the engineer and play it with the same amount of attack. And if you hear it, those leads, I mean, dude, they rip your head off like no other guitar I've ever heard. And I could imagine what Eddie thought when he first heard that. King Edward probably was like, "Uh-oh, there's a new sheriff in town."
I'll tell you this. I'm just picturing the tapping section in Crazy Train where he walks up as he's tapping, to be able to mimic that and hit the same, like you said, the attack of hitting the notes, because it's a very smooth, there's no kind of cutting between the notes in it.
Yeah, it's fluid.
That's insane. That's absolutely insane. All right. To close out side A, we've touched on some blues, some jazz, some rock. I'm going to stick with your hard rock here, and I'm going to go with my first favorite guitarist of all time. And no, it's not Alvin and the Chipmunks, because I did have that record prior to this one, but I digress. My cousins, basically from the womb up until kindergarten, raised me on a soundtrack of AC/DC and Angus Young. And as a kid, Angus Young was the guy standing on the cover of Highway to Hell with the devil horn sticking out. Like, he was such an iconic icon as well as guitar player, being on the cover of Power Age and every album cover. He was the face of AC/DC the way Eddie is the face of Iron Maiden.
Absolutely.
And to close out aside, I think there's only one song you could really, truly close with for AC/DC, and that's the epic concert closer, but album opener for Those About to Rock, We Salute You, the title track. When those cannons raise up on stage, I get goosebumps just thinking about it. That guitar solo, to me, is what Slash and Guns N' Roses were paying homage to at the end of Paradise City, that big, massive, celebratory ending. And to me, AC/DC kind of wrote the book with For Those About to Rock.
Absolutely, man. They nailed it. And AC/DC is such an important band to me. And I remember blues songs, like Night Prowler and Sin City and
Ride On even.
Yeah, Ride On was a big one. And it got my young head thinking, wow, okay, no matter how much the stuff, this is the roots of it. It was like Chuck Berry on roids or something, because it's all so rock and roll and heavy on the roll, because, there's a lot of mechanical rock music out there that frankly, it doesn't swing a bag of shit, you know? And that's the cool thing about AC/DC is that it has a swing to it. There's movement in those 4 bars. And it's pretty interesting because me and Samantha Fish are heading over to Australia to do a tour in May. And a friend of a friend hooked me up with Mark Evans, who was the bass player on all the records up until Highway to Hell, which is when Cliff joined.
Yes.
So I think Mark Evans, who played on Dirty Deeds and all those records you just said, he's going to come sit in with us. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, I'm excited just to have any inkling close to those guys,
Well, there you have it, folks. Side A of our Ultimate Guitar Solos playlist, which kicked off with Jimi Hendrix's Room Full of Mirrors, Prince's Purple Rain, Django Reinhardt's You Rascal You, Kenny Burrell's Chitlin Concarne, Otis Rush's All Your Love, Santana's Black Magic Woman, Jeff Beck's I Ain't Superstitious, Fleetwood Mac's I'm So Afraid, Lindsey Buckingham on guitar, Ozzy Osbourne's Over the Mountain, Randy Rhoads on guitar, and AC/DC For Those About to Rock, We Salute You, Angus Young on guitar. Head over to myweeklymixtape.com to hear all the songs we've discussed in this mix through the playlist embedded on the episode page. Now, Jesse, I want to talk to you about your new album, The Hard Way Blues. This album was produced by Shooter Jennings. Now, given your work with Shooter's father, Waylon Jennings, on his 1996 album, Right for the Time, can you talk about how the working relationship between you and the Jennings family kind of added a generation for this new album?
Well, it's interesting. When I got the gig with Waylon, which was kind of a fluke, he saw me on a TV show. And of course, I grew up around all that outlaw country stuff because it was outlaw country, or some call it progressive country, but we all called it outlaw country. It was really invented in the 70s in Austin, Texas. Jerry Jeff Walker and Michael Martin Murphy and Waylon and Willie and all these Towns Van Zandt and all these songwriters were there. And so they all started surrounding themselves with these players that whoever was hanging around. And these guys, were monsters. But they weren't. It wasn't Nashville. It wasn't LA. It wasn't New York. It was really unique. But, that's kind of like my parents kind of were there when that was all going on. Armadillo World Headquarters and all that stuff. So I heard a lot of that kind of stuff. And that's how I came to kind of find it.
So you recorded this entire album in less than a week. Was that a strategic decision, or did the album just come together that way for you?
Well, it's interesting because when I did play with Waylon, I was only 24. So I was closer to age with Shooter Jennings than I was his son, who was in 9th or 10th grade at that time, than I was to the guys in the band. And we had a way of working together. Waylon was amazing because he had this perfect pitch, right? And people don't know this, but he's like the killer harmony singer. And he's got his own guitar style, like completely his own 1,000%. Like we were talking about Lindsey Buckingham earlier. It's like that, where it's just like, he just does his own thing. So I was never going to try to ape Waylon or play it like Waylon. I wanted to do something that was me, but not too crazy out of the box, And it was so cool, man, because like I played his leather-bound Telecaster on almost that whole record. I didn't even play my guitar. I played Waylon's guitar. It was run through an old Super 6 Fender amp. And we did all kinds of crazy stuff. I actually played wah-wah pedal with all these chicken picking licks with a wah-wah pedal. And James Hetfield wrote and guitar player that he really loved that. It's our version of The Boxer by Paul Simon.
Yes. Such a great cover.
And then fast forward 20 something years later, and Shooter becomes this Grammy award winning producer, And so I called Shooter and I was like, hey man, can we make a record together? I know you're expensive. And he started laughing. He said, let's just figure it out. So, he knows I'm a player and I wanted to do it old school. So we showed up in a studio in the Valley in LA where all these great records have been cut. Johnny Cash and Lucinda Williams and Tom Petty and all these people had cut there. And we went in with the band in the room. The record is mostly live. There's few overdubs. We used a ton of the work vocals, a ton of the live guitar stuff. It's slamming to tape. We're not tuning stuff. And it happened in 5 days. And we went in, and the stuff that I have on the record, it's kind of a cross between some East Texas blues stuff. There's some classic rock sounding stuff. And there's also this whole lyrical Texas singer-songwriter thing going on throughout the song. So I really tried to do this hybrid that I thought would be interesting for me and focus. It's a guitar record, from start to finish.
And we're going to talk about a couple of songs from the album, but I first want to ask, how do you feel bringing Shooter on board colored the production and the overall sound of the album? Not the songs itself, but what did he bring to the sound of the album as a whole?
Well, he created an environment because this was new stuff. It's not like we've been playing this stuff. We didn't show up. Like, what he really did was he helped us flush out these arrangements, trim the fat, get to the heart of the song, don't bore us, get to the chorus, that kind of thing. But also kind of like gave me some room to stretch out as an instrumentalist, so it feels like that I get to play on it instead of this like 2.5 minute single ethos that used to have. I mean, I love the Ramones. I think they're fun and, it's not what I do, but he let me stretch out. There's some 4 or 5 minute tracks on this record. And that was kind of fun to do that and to realize that, hey man, you got to show your superpowers, you can't like deprive yourself of that stuff. So he would create these arrangements where it was like, okay, we're going to go off into Wonderland here. And I was like, yeah, let's go. So it was exciting.
Well, let's go to Wonderland, because actually I think if Wonderland is what I'm thinking, the first song I want to touch on is Baby's Long Gone.
Fishing on the bayou bank, making love on the ground by the wine we drink. Well, I caught her stepping out a couple of times, ain't no sink myself, and I know that rhymes. She's gone, gone, gone. Yeah, Jesus called her home. Baby's long gone. Come on.
This song immediately jumped out at me during my first listen because the opening has this intricate stomp acoustic guitar opening, very backwoods, swamp rock, country-esque. But in the middle of the track, it does a 180 into a full-blown rock track. So across the song's 3 minutes, it covers a whole lot of musical ground. When you were writing this song, did it unfold into that 180 in the studio, or did you plan that from the beginning?
It unfolded with Shooter. I brought it in. So there's this thing in East Texas. Your guitar players will be interested in this because it's a really specific thing. And it's this East Texas droning thing. And it started with Blind Lemon Jefferson. And I'll be frank, those Blind Lemon Jefferson records, they're hard to listen to because they're so breaking up. I mean, the fidelity is just horrendous, right? But you could tell the guy's playing his ass off and he's a singer. And this is pre-Robert Johnson, right? This is pre-Robert Johnson. And this is like a hit song in terms of back then for what constituted a hit. And then later, Mance Lipscomb and Lightning Hopkins would kind of take over that mantle. And they would always keep, if they were playing a song in E, they'd keep the E string droning the whole time they were playing leads. So they would you would see them hit it with their thumb. If they were playing a song in A, they would do an A. If it was D, they'd tune the E down to a D, and they would do these riffs. So when I'm playing this riff, and those guys actually, are from like right down the road from where I grew up. If you hear me playing this riff, I'm playing two strings pretty much the same time on all of those riffs. So it's got this East Texas droning blues sound. And I really wanted to explore that because during COVID, I went down a huge rabbit hole of like country blues, the East Texas stuff, the Mississippi Fred McDonald and, all that kind of stuff. And I was like, man, I want to bring that in there. And I always heard Dylan and my songwriters like Guy Clark and Townes Van Zandt, I always heard them talk about those guitar players, but I was like, they can't play like those guitar players, but I can. I have the facility to do it. And so I was like, that's where I want to go with this.
Well, the next track I want to dive into is Navasota, which introduces a slide guitar in its solo section.
Navasota's where we got the family plot.
How do you decide in a given track how to attack the solo? Is that something that you record a guitar solo using several different styles, maybe with a slide, maybe finger picking, maybe shredding? Or is that the instance of you're writing this song and you already have a guitar solo in mind as the song is kind of being tracked?
I didn't really have a guitar solo in mind. It just kind of felt like the thing to do. The interesting thing about that song is it starts off like we're gonna do this big Texas blues shuffle.
Yep.
And we don't do that. We go straight into this funky kind of thing, but and we keep turning it around and we do that. Everything's building. And it sounds like it's going to go into this, but it never does that. We go into this totally different thing. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And I hadn't used any slide on the guitar on the record up until that point. So when I heard the lead section, as I said, I'm a huge disciple of the Reverend Billy Gibbons. He's like, to me, I've met Keith Richards. I played with Willie Nelson. I'm pretty sure Billy Gibbons is the coolest white guitar player I've ever met in my entire life. Billy just exudes cool. And so there's some stuff that he does, like on Heard It on the X and in some of those songs where when he plays slide, he's barely breaking up into the note that he's supposed to be going into. And the guitar amp starts breaking up. So I tried to do that kind of vibe on Navasota.
Well, the next song I want to dive into is Huntsville Prison Rodeo.
Well, at the Huntsville Prison Rodeo, those cowboys were adored. For 3 seconds of freedom between the hospital and morgue. Well, the bucking Bronx, the pissed off bulls put on one hell of a show. With desperados riding in the Huntsville prison,
The guitar solo in this track has a ridiculous tone on it, I just have to say, almost with a cathedral-like reverb on the solo. It gives it a real unique signature across the album as a whole. And those little intricacies that I'm talking about, is that something you're listening for specifically, or is that where Shooter comes into play and says, hey, we need to kind of add some more reverb to this to give it the feel, or is that kind of a combination of the two?
I think both of us were saying that we wanted to try to experiment with that, and it worked. That song almost didn't make the record.
Really?
It doesn't sound like anything else on the record.
No.
It sounds more like a country rock song. And I was a little hesitant because the record is either bluesy stuff or kind of classic rock, influenced. So I was a little hesitant to put that on the record, but Shooter fought me on it. And he's like, no, I really think this is cool. It's a part of what you do. It'll change, give the listeners' ears a break. And, it ended up working. So it's a true story. It's about my parents taking us to the Huntsville Prison Rodeo when I was a kid, and how completely terrifying and scarring it was for a little kid to watch, the most violent rodeo you could ever imagine. So it was traumatic and fun all at the same time. So, but yeah, there's some little delay on there. There's some reverb. It's kind of washy. And yeah, it's kind of cathedral-esque, big room reverbs. And there's some, kind of chicken picking, parts on there, some that kind of thing. So.
Well, I want to touch on something you just said there, because across the album, you had mentioned that Huntsville Prison Rodeo was kind of a story about your life. The album lyrically, from front to back, there's a lot of storytelling aspects on the album. I'm just going to choose one track right now and play a clip from Angel in My Pocket.
Yeah.
Got an angel in my pocket I walk around with all the time. When the mean old world starts picking on me, my angel starts to shine. A tiny glow from my front pocket in my faded Levi jeans gives me enough strength to make it through damn near anything. And when it shines, 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 Lord, it shines. Well, I pick myself back up more times than I've been knocked down. Broken bones and hearts on motorcycles riding at the speed of sound. But that angel in my pocket always gets me home to you, where my secrets are safe, the love we make feels raw and pure and true. And I sure do miss you, darling, when I'm gone more than half the time. And on nights when the tears are falling, well, my pocket shines, shines, shines.
When I first heard this song, I had jotted down a little note before I started forming my questions, and that little note was channeling the beauty of a Jon Prine song.
Yeah.
So you can imagine the hair on my arm standing up when I finally read through the press release and saw that you wrote that in the wake of his passing.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear your feelings towards Jon Prine and then what it meant for the song Angel in My Pocket for you.
Well, I'm a huge Jon Prine fan, and I can't impress upon the guitar players who are listening right now. Okay, listening to songwriters might be more important than listening to guitar players, because if you get a bunch of hot musicians around together who only spent 10,000 hours on bass, 10,000 hours on drum, 10,000 hours on guitar, and they have not spent 10,000 hours on learning how to write songs, and they don't have a good song between them, that it doesn't matter how awesome you are on your instrument. So the songwriter thing, it kind of got hijacked by FM radio. And they turned a lot of these guys that were considered light rock or whatever, who are really songwriters. They didn't know, they couldn't, market them that way. So, you had all these great songwriters, whether it was Townes Van Zandt or John Prine, or even the more mainstream guys like Jackson Browne and James Taylor and all those great records they made with LA players, with Waddy Wachtel and Leland Sklar and Russ Kunkel and all those stuff. Those are super important records to me. So the whole songwriter thing is of the highest order. And if you're playing on great songs, man, it's a lot easier. And John Prine was like one of the guys that, my sister had his record when I was a kid, and, he was so witty and quirky and just, there's an interesting thing about John Prine. I got to work with Chris Christopherson, who might be one of the greats of that whole bunch I just named, in terms of like writing hit songs that millions of people, heard and cut, the biggest stars ever. And Chris told me that he produced the first Billy Joe Shaver record, and he produced the first John Prine record. And when he first heard about John Prine, Steve Goodman, another great songwriter in Chicago, he called up Chris Christopherson and said, man, you got to fly to Chicago and see this guy. He's a mailman and he's playing. And it's just mind blowing. And they were like, we got to break this guy's hands. He's just too good. And so, so John Prine, masterful songwriter. And that's a friend of mine had just been saying about my wife that I had an angel in my pocket. It was a little wink about my wife. So that's where the idea came from.
Well, with your permission, I'd like to pivot away for a few questions outside of the Hard Way Blues before we get over to side B. You had mentioned her earlier. Your last album, 2023's Death Wish Blues, was a collaboration effort with Samantha Fish, and that was produced by Jon Spencer of the Jon Spencer Blues Explosion, became a global hit, and received a Grammy nomination for Contemporary Blues Album of the Year. How did that collaboration come together for you two? Because it was such an amazingly popular piece of 2023's music scene.
Yeah, I mean, it's the closest thing I think that me or Samantha have had in terms of a hit record. It was the biggest thing both of us had ever done, where it was our names featured. Samantha used to open up for me in her hometown of Kansas City when I come through, and I met her and I thought she was brilliant. I knew something was going to happen for her. And I'm not just saying that. I actually knew back then. I was like, she plays really good. Like something's going to happen. I don't know what it is, but so, whatever, fast forward 12, 15 years later, or whatever it is. And I'm playing in New Orleans and she comes out to check me out in New Orleans. And she's like, hey, do you want to record some music together? And then her manager, who became my manager as well, Reuben Williams had a really big hand in all this. I mean, he kind of put it together, and he was the first one who mentioned Jon Spencer. And I was like, wow, I love Jon Spencer. I never thought about him producing it, but I always liked the way his records sound. And, this was our attempt to do something different in a genre that has been just regurgitating Stevie Ray and guitar sounds, John Bonham drum sounds over and over and over and over and over. And it was our chance to like, let's do something different. Let's put the drums in a different place sonically. And, let's use some of this North Georgia, let's go some different places instead of the obvious places, and let's, I know they want soup, but let's don't feed them soup this time. Let's try to, think outside the box a little bit. So I think that helped. And we'd never met Jon until we got to the studio.
Really?
No, I mean, a million things. And Jon, to his credit, He's the one who really went down and took R.L. Burnside on his first tour. And, he's a big part of that. Him and Fat Possum were both collaboratively responsible for turning people on to all those artists down there. So that was the whole thing, was like a million things could have gone wrong, man, and nothing went wrong. We kept just knocking on wood for 16 months, and it just kept happening and growing and growing and growing.
Well, you mentioned you got some tour dates coming up with her this year. Given the insane success of Death Wish Blues, is it safe to assume another record will be coming down the pike for you guys?
Well, we're not really even talking about it right now because we both got stuff that we got to go do. I got to put this record out, and I don't know when it would happen, but I know that we're bonded at the hip for the rest of our lives after getting nominated. So, it's definitely not out of the question.
I am a personal huge fan of cover songs. I talk about them all the time on this show, and there's a cover show that you played in that I'd like to ask about your experience on, because I find it just a fascinating show in and of itself. And that was in 2021. You played guitar for Glenn Danzig during 2 of his Danzig Sings Elvis shows. I'd love to know what that experience was like. And do you have a personal favorite Elvis song that you got to jam alongside of Glenn Danzig?
I don't have a personal favorite, but because I'm such a huge Elvis fan. I'm a huge Scotty Moore fan. I'm a huge James Burton fan. I'm a total nerd level fan for that stuff. Little Sister and all that stuff that James Burton got to play, and then the early stuff with Scotty. But yeah, the Danzig gig was crazy. He'd got my number. He found out about me through Rob Zombie, because I'd worked with Rob Zombie on The Devil's Rejects and on the Halloween movie, and I'd done those soundtracks with Rob. And so he said, I'm going to do an Elvis thing. And he talked to, I think, Shooter as well, Shooter and his wife, Misty. And they were like, well, if you're going to do Elvis, you got to get Jesse Dayton. And you don't want the kind of howdy-doody guy in the bow tie standing next to Glenn Danzig. You know what I mean? That's not going to work. You can't have Richie Cunningham up there,
Mm-hmm.
And get somebody who knows it, but who's got some edge. And so he called me up and we talked, and he flew me in, and the band went in and rehearsed, and then Glenn came in, and then we heard that voice, and that voice is it's one of the best voices in rock music. And it was amazing. It was amazing. I couldn't keep doing it because I couldn't, cancel my solo gigs and my gigs with Sam to go do something like that. But it was really awesome to get to do it, for a little while.
Well, you brought it up, and I would be remiss if I didn't bring up Banjo and Sullivan from The Devil's Rejects, as well as Captain Clegg and the Night Creatures from Halloween 2. How did you and Rob Zombie come together to work on multiple soundtracks together? Because based on the other music we've been talking about tonight, horror films with these type of soundtracks is a little bit of a pivot.
Yeah, absolutely. But although I did love them growing up, because I'm a total film guy, and
yes,
I watch a lot of film, and I grew up watching those Roger Corman films and those B movies, and I loved all the Hammer films that came out of England, and so I just like watching movies like that. But a friend of mine, a really great friend of mine, who's a really successful character actor, he's one of those guys that if I say his name, Lou Temple, you won't know him. But if you see him, you'll go, oh, that's that guy in that thing I saw. He's one of those. He's like one of the top 3 working actors in SAG, top 3%, And so he's making this movie with Rob, and he calls Rob, and they're sitting at this party one night, and Rob's like, yeah, he goes, I think I'm going to do this fake band, like where they did these instead of found footage, they find tapes of this band that's in the movie. And it was this super convoluted story with this whole backstory. And I mean, I did an interview with David, I forgot his name, the guy from Rolling Stone who has the Ramones haircut. He's been there forever. I forgot his name, but he's a big time journalist. And he was trying to like find out like what the hell was going on with this thing because Rob was like, hey, we're going to put out this fake record like it's a record that we found. And then we're just releasing it now. So just go in and do all this like kind of 70s country rock. And, you know, one of the songs ended up being a hit on XM Sirius. I mean, they still play it every day. It's crazy, but, you know, I think that record was a little bit before its time. It influenced a bunch of people and has a song on there called I'm at Home Getting Hammered While She's Out Getting Nailed. And it's like a bluegrass song. And also, there's a version of Freebird on there with a bunch of super hot bluegrass pickers. And I got to play that for Gary Rosington on the bus for Skinner. And he loved it. He couldn't believe it. So, and Howard Stern started playing it too. That was another thing. So that record really changed my life because Rob gave me like 75% of the publishing and only took 25.
Wow.
And most people like either take it all or most of it. And Rob was like super generous. And, you know, Martin Scorsese might be a bigger award-winning director, but he hadn't sold millions of records to crazy rock fans who want to buy that stuff. So we sold a bunch of records.
Awesome. Well, let's pivot now to side B of our Ultimate Guitar Solos playlist. And we talked about this artist briefly on side A, and I feel like knowing the listeners of My Weekly Mixtape, if I don't include this guitarist, there'll be a revolution. So let's just get it out of the way. To start off side B, Eddie Van Halen, 1978, Eruption. I don't think there's anything that needs to be said about this song. However, we have a great episode all about Van Halen, featuring Eric Senich from the Van Halen News Desk. You can get a whole 2 hours of Van Halen fix there. In this instance, I have a feeling the guitarists who are listening have heard what they need to know about Eruption, but I just feel like it needs to be included when you talk about the greatest guitarists because Eddie really paved the way for rock musicians moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I almost put Eddie on my list instead of Randy. But I kind of went with the underdog, it was just Randy. But Eddie definitely deserves more props in terms of reinventing the electric guitar. And we were all crazy about him. I saw him open up for Kiss when I was a kid. It was mind-bending. I mean, we just literally didn't understand what he was doing. And I think he used this MXR phaser pedal on Eruption. And it's the same exact pedal that Waylon Jennings was using on all that outlaw country stuff, and the same pedal that I think Chris Stein was using in Blondie. So I love to bring that up because it kind of gives you a reference for what was going on culturally at the time. So, you know, these records were coming out all at this is 1978, you know, and Eruption was probably the most mind-bending guitar event in any of our lives.
Could not agree more. And I was almost ready to throw a curveball and go with Spanish Fly off of Van Halen 2, because hearing Eddie do Eddie on an acoustic guitar in almost a flamenco setting was always mind-blowing to me. Like, how do you follow up Eruption? Instead of going louder, go softer and still blow people's minds. But what are you going to follow up Eruption with?
Well, I'm going to go with, I mean, you know, it's Eruption, so you can't put anything too laid back on. I mean, I'm going to have to go with the second AC/DC song of the night, which is the studio version, A Whole Lot of Rosie. And, you know, I think Angus played such a huge influence in Eddie's playing. I mean, you could tell, like, when Van Halen was on the Sunset Strip, supposedly they were doing the entire first Montrose record. And that entire first Montrose record is a mind-blowing, seminal record. Like, it was the blueprint before Van Halen came on. And they had an 18-year-old kid named Sammy Hagar, who was a singer, who to me, it's still like Sammy's opus greatest singing, because he sounds like he's trying to sing like a young soul shouter, like a Sam Cooke. And I don't know if it was because Ronnie Montrose was saying, sing it funkier or whatever, but it's just mind-bending. So Eddie, was listening to Ronnie Montrose. They were playing tons of AC/DC covers when they were playing Gazzarri's. So I think as far as heavy stuff that was coming out at the same time, with a band that was a little older, I'd go with Whole Lotta Rosie with the late, great Bon Scott.
Oh, man. We've already talked about how influential Angus Young is to me, so I don't need to go on any longer. Whole Lotta Rosie is such a moment on stage with the blow up Rosie through the whole song. It's such an iconic AC/DC moment. But now coming out of Angus Young, I want to go with these big name rock guitarists and stay in this vibe. So I am just debating which song, because there are a lot of fantastic guitar solos by Brian May. And I'm just going to go my age. I grew up in the age where Wayne's World was such a big deal to my age demographic. I'm going to go with the obvious pick in Bohemian Rhapsody. It's such a great guitar solo. It was reintroduced in the 90s through that movie, the power of film, taking a song and introducing it to a whole new generation. And as far as favorite guitarists of all time, I've always said Brian May was top 5, and I got the chance on my honeymoon in 2005 when Queen was playing with Paul Rogers at the Aruba Music Festival in Aruba. They happened to be staying at the same resort that my wife and I had our honeymoon. And my wife and I went for a couples massage, and they sent us into separate changing rooms to get ready before we went into the massage room. And I'm getting ready, and a gentleman walks up to me and he goes, "Good afternoon." And I turn and kind of gather myself. And he says, "So are you here for, vacation?" I said, "No, I'm here on my honeymoon with my wife." And he goes, "Oh, congratulations on your honeymoon." And I said, "And I know why you're here, Brian May. I have second row tickets for the show on Saturday. You're one of my favorite guitarists ever." And we ended up having to sit there for about 15 minutes until the room was ready. So I got to sit and talk guitar music with Brian May of Queen for 15 minutes. We went off and had our massages. When we got back, "How was your massage?" "It was lovely." "How was yours?" "It was amazing." And we walk out together. And my wife is standing with somebody, and Brian goes, "Is that your wife?" I said, "It certainly is." He goes, "Well, I guess he met my daughter." And we stood and talked. And I said, "Look, no one's going to believe this story. Can I trouble you for an autograph?" And he says, "Are you kidding me?" "Of course." And he signed a little business card to Brian and Katie, "Happy marriage, Brian May." For the rest of the week, we ran into him 3 other times. And he always said, "Brian and Katie, how's your honeymoon going?" And I'm like, "It's going great, Brian May of Queen." Like, my wife is still embarrassed about me doing that. But one night I actually blew off one of our dinner reservations because they invited us to have a drink with them. And my wife's like, "What about dinner?" I'm like, "Fuck dinner. We're going to have a drink with Queen."
Absolutely. Well, I'm not scared of hits, but I will tell you, if you want to just rip the faces off of your listeners, play Dragon Attack by Queen.
Oh, God, that was the song I was debating putting in. Okay, you know what? Screw it. I'm changing it. Dragon Attack. It's one of my favorite songs by them. I'm going with that instead.
So badass.
And as a bassist, that bass line, oh.
Every time I hear it, I'm just like, oh my God, this is like one of the toughest badass songs I've ever heard.
Yeah, I'm totally pivoting, because when I was sitting here saying I'm debating between songs, and I went with the hit instead, but being you brought it up, it was Divine Intervention. Dragon Attack it is. What are you going to follow it up with?
Well, I'm going to go somewhere else, because we've been going heavy rock, and I'm going to do something a little different. I'm a big vintage motorcycle freak. So that's my kind of lot in life. And I've got a bunch of bikes, and, they're British and Italian. I've got a Harley too, but Triumph, Moto Guzzi, and a friend of mine has a Vincent. It's one of the rarest motorcycles in the world. And there's a guy named Richard Thompson. And there's a Richard Thompson song called 52 Black Vincents. And there's an acoustic version of the song. And it's off his all acoustic record. And Richard Thompson is like Mark Knopfler, Jimmy Page, all these guys are kind of gaga for Richard Thompson's acoustic guitar playing. And the interesting thing about Richard Thompson is he had this band called Fairport Convention when he was young. And these were never big records over here in the States, but they were huge over in Europe. And the cool thing about Richard Thompson is that Richard Thompson somehow embedded his Celtic heritage into his guitar playing. So when you hear him play, it's not another white guy vamping on the blues. It's this guy who's like bringing in this almost like Irish and Welsh and Scottish and British Celtic influence, which may I add, along with African music, was the basis for American music. And it was the basis for the first country songs that like the Carter family and Jimmy Reed, all that stuff. So this record is amazing. And he's saying it's an outlaw song. So it's about a guy who's a total robber, thief, and he's got this amazing, he's the bad boy from the other side of the tracks. And it's the same thing as I Shot the Sheriff, right? It's the same thing as a million great outlaw songs that you've heard. And Red Molly, the beautiful red-haired Irish girl, falls in love with a bad boy, and he ends up getting killed at the end, and he gives her his motorcycle, which is it's in the finger picking. I'm pretty sure no one in the entire world, I don't care what little uber talented 8-year-old you find on TikTok who can do Eruption, which by the way doesn't impress me. People keep sending me these videos of these little kids playing these songs, and I'm like, if you want to impress me, write Eruption. If you want to impress me, write this stuff. It's great mimicry. That's how we all start. I get it. But I don't think anyone in the world could play guitar like Richard Thompson does on 52 Black Vincent. And make sure it's the acoustic version if you can get it.
I will definitely look that one up. I mean, Time Magazine ranked this song in its all-time 100 songs, saying, and I quote, 52 Black Vincent is a glorious example of what one guy can accomplish with just a guitar, a voice, an imagination, and a set of astonishingly nimble fingers.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're a fan of cover songs like I am, everybody from Del McCrory Band to Robert Earl Keen to Bob Dylan has covered this track. It's absolutely amazing. I love the song. And I think coming out of it, I'm going to go with something that pivots a little bit more. We're kind of pivoting around a little bit here.
Yeah.
And while 52 Black Vincent doesn't have a lot of rockabilly, I don't have a lot more acoustic stuff sitting in my playlist. So what I'm going to do is bring out to just one of my favorite guitar solos of all time, just because of the uniqueness of it, because of the fact that when it first came out in 1982, I was 5 years old, and the song was about cats, and I was like, oh, okay, I could dig this. And then I heard the guitar tone, and I was like, wow, this song is cool.
Yeah.
And when you're a three-piece of Slim Jim Phantom, Lee Rocker, and Brian Setzer, you get the Stray Cats, and the Stray Cat Strut is one of my favorite guitar solos of all time. There's something that's just so cool. There's such a swagger to it that it blows my mind the amount of cool that one song could emote. Even at 5 years old, I knew what cool was because of this song.
Absolutely. And Brian is a god. I mean, Jeff Beck, the greatest, Billy Gibbons, you name it, the greatest guitar players in the world, Page. They used to all go out and see them all the time when they were starting off. I mean, the Stones wanted to give them a record deal. I mean, when they got to London, they got on a plane from New Jersey and they went to London and they were sleeping. And I know all these guys too, by the way.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm closer with Jim than I am with, I know Lee pretty well and Brian a little bit as well. I've played gigs with Lee and Jim before, but when they got to London, people were losing their minds. I mean, everyone went out to see them, you know, whether it was the Beatles, like whether it was Paul and Ringo would be there, or George Harrison would be there, you know, Chrissie Hynde and Joe Strummer, that whole cool set was going to see him, and they were blown away. And Brian is influenced by a guy named Cliff Gallup from Gene Vincent's band. And he's also influenced heavily by Django Reinhardt, who we played earlier, but monster guitar player.
All right. What are you following up Stray Cat Strut with?
I'm going to go with a song by Gene Vincent and the Blue Caps, and we're going to keep it rockabilly just for one more song. So this was Jeff Beck's first influence. Like, Jeff Beck has a record out that's called Jeff Beck and the Blue Caps. I think that's the name of it, but it's a rockabilly record. And he plays exactly note for note, just like Cliff Gallup. But these songs, you know, when you go back and you listen to them, you got to put them in historical perspective. You know, you can't judge them sonically by like Pantera, you know? So you've got to like sonically say, okay, this is what they had back then. They had these little amps. They were overdriving them. That's why they sound so cool. And the guy's playing a Gretsch guitar, and he's obviously could play the shit out of jazz. But he's ripping up the guitar, and he's got that Echoplex, and it's the slapback is bouncing perfectly. You know, it doesn't sound muddy. And this record, man, Cliff Gallup playing with Gene Vincent and the Blue Caps, Race with the Devil.
I don't think rockabilly becomes what it is, like the Stray Cats or any type of rockabilly, without a group like Gene Vincent and the Blue Caps. I feel like they're one of the, I don't want to say but one of the founding fathers of what modern rockabilly became.
Yeah, well, there's a song by Eddie Cochran called Something Else, and it's the first time that you ever hear, it's almost like the first punk or heavy metal, because it's just like no one had ever got the kick drum playing straight eights with a guitar and the bass going, you know, that would become Cheap Trick. And it was ground central for what would become later. You know, you could look at these guys and you could say, oh, you know, it's 50s. They don't have long hair yet. I mean, long hair didn't exist at this point. None of that stuff was happening. And let me tell you, these were bad boys. I mean, these guys were partying their brains out, and they were like getting laid on the road. Their husbands checked them, and you know they were fighting, and then they were all nuts. So yeah, Gene Vincent, Eddie Cochran, that's the real deal.
Well, coming out of that, I'm going to go with one of my favorite instrumental songs of all time, which is basically a very long guitar solo, and it was probably one of my first introductions to jazz, because like I had mentioned when we were talking about Kenny Burrell, I was introduced to Kenny Burrell through Stevie Ray Vaughan on the Sky is Crying album. However, I had other Stevie Ray Vaughan albums, including 1989's In Step. And the closing track on that, which is my favorite instrumental song of all time, is Riviera Paradise.
Yeah, I love that song.
Just a gorgeous, stunning, beautiful guitar work. Some of the most elegant tone I've heard out of the song. And then some of the stuff he's doing at the end where he's just plucking where the guitar strings are held down and making it musical. It breaks my heart every time I hear the song because I think of what might have been had he not passed. But it also is such a beautiful footnote to his studio albums while he was on this earth. So it's just such an amazing tune.
I love Riviera Paradise. I think that Stevie was obviously going in a direction, listening to more jazz. I mean, he couldn't just keep playing 12-bar blues or derivative of 12-bar blues. I mean, that's where his soul lived, but there's no telling what he would have gone. I think Stevie Ray, if he would have lived, he probably would have won a couple of jazz Grammys for Best Instrumental. And, that could have happened because his guitar playing was invariably becoming more sophisticated. And I think that's what happens to people. It's the natural progression. So yeah, I love this. I love this song.
All right. You have 2 picks left and I have 1. So what are you going to follow up Riviera Paradise with?
So I'm going to follow Riviera Paradise with a track by a guy named Roy Buchanan.
Ooh, nice.
Roy Buchanan, if you've ever watched any of the most important Martin Scorsese films, which, for me, I'm all about Goodfellas. I think it's like the best film I've ever seen. And Casino's is short, it comes in a close second for Martin's Scorsese stuff. Also love the film that he did in Boston called The Departed. And this song is in all 3 of those movies. And it's his version of Sweet Dreams by Patsy Cline.
Nice.
And it's a great song to follow up what you just played because it's also a guitar instrumental. But Roy Buchanan was a freak show. And there's something weird in the water in Washington, D.C. because you got all these great guitar players from there. And Roy Buchanan was the first one. And Roy Buchanan was also Merle Haggard's favorite guitar player. And Merle Haggard had a guy named Roy Nichols, who was a killer Telecaster player. And there's footage on YouTube of Roy Buchanan and Roy Nichols both playing with Merle Haggard. And it's amazing. So Roy Buchanan was one of these guys who was just like, you just couldn't put him in a box. I mean, he could play blues, he could play country, he could play jazz, and he could do it with the best of them and burn the house down.
Absolutely iconic guitarist. One of my favorite unearthed albums, quote unquote, was one he released called The Prophet, the unreleased first Polydor album, which featured Charlie Daniels, of all people, singing on a bunch of tracks. Charlie Daniels was actually working with Roy to try to get him started before he put out his first solo album. This was the album that was originally meant to come out before 1972's Roy Buchanan, which features Sweet Dreams. Definitely look that one up. It was put out by Hippo Select in the early 2000s. I want to say 2004. Different side of Roy Buchanan's music, and I love it all the same. Guy is just an insane guitarist, so I couldn't agree with you more. Following up Roy Buchanan for my last pick of the night, I'm going to do a call back to my first pick of the night when I picked Prince's Purple Rain, because you followed up talking about While My Guitar Gently Weeps, the solo that Prince so elegantly played with Tom Petty and the rest at the 2004 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I'm going to go with the original George Harrison from the White Album, because there had to be a place for Prince to rise up, and I'd love to get George into this discussion. There's not much that needs to be said about this song. It's paved the way musically, and I think it's the best Beatles guitar solo, in my opinion. I'm sure a lot of Beatles fans would argue that one, but this one just holds a special place for me.
Absolutely, man. I'm a huge Beatles fan. I mean, the Stones are like my favorite rock and roll band. I've seen them like 28 times, and I'm about to go see them a couple of times when I get home from this, because they're going to be playing in Houston and then in the Jazz Fest in New Orleans, which we're heading there too. But I was always a Beatles fan. I'm so lucky that I had an older hippie sister who was into the Beatles. And, once you start dissecting George's playing, you realize, like, if you go back and listen to All Things Must Pass, which is, it's as great a solo record as any solo record that John or Paul put out. And he's got this. I mean, the only people I know who are truly original slide players, who aren't Elmore James, who aren't the original blues guys, is Duane Allman and George Harrison. Those are the two guys, when they play slide, you go, oh, that's George Harrison, or that's Duane Allman. But yeah, this song was, just incredible. And it's about, Clapton stealing Patty Boyd from. So there's a lot of pain in this song. You can hear it.
Definitely emotion. just pouring out of that guitar. Well, Jesse, you have the chance now to take us home with the final song of the evening. What are you going to wrap up the Ultimate Guitar Solos playlist with?
Well, I'm going to go. I mean, there's a record called Live at the Regal. It's a B.B. King record. And people are losing their shit in the crowd. I mean, the women are losing their mind. There's a part of me that wants to go with that, but I'm going to keep it upbeat a little more. I'm a huge Jimmy Page fan. I could even say that I'm more of a Jimmy Page fan than I am a Zeppelin fan, even though I'm a big Zeppelin nerd. I love all that stuff. And for the listeners out there, don't let anyone tell you that you can't like the Clash and Led Zeppelin. Don't listen to those purists or those genre loyalists or whatever. You can listen to punk rock and you can listen to the greatest classic rock stuff. It doesn't matter. There's no rules. There's no rules at all. And so, I used to tell my friends who were in the Ramones and the Clash, that's my older brother's music. I'm like, I don't care if it's freaking my great granddad's music. It rocks my balls off and I love it. And it's like, and so I went down this Jimmy Page rabbit hole and I found all this stuff that he played guitar on, which he played guitar on Goldfinger for the James Bond movie. Mm-hmm. And he also played guitar on Van Morrison and Them. He did the guitar on Baby Please Don't Go.
Yes.
Which is just some swinging dick, badass, just guitar playing, like, wow. But if I may include my own self in this, I'm going to go even further. And there's a track with me and Matt Sorum from The Cult, from Guns N' Roses, yep. Velvet Revolver on drums. His track is amazing. And Shooter Jennings on keyboards, and Michael Devin from Whitesnake. And Michael Devin is playing bass and singing, and I'm playing guitar. And it's off of this soundtrack called Chasin' Whiskey. And it's our version of Baby Please Don't Go. Check out this soundtrack. It's a documentary on Jack Daniels. So I'm pretty sure you got it in there. It's Baby Please Don't Go.
Originally popularized by Big Joe Williams in 1935. I know we've mentioned him twice this night, so let's go for the trifecta. Angus Young shreds AC/DC's version on the 1984 US compilation 74 Jailbreak. You have Aerosmith honking on Bobo with Joe Perry doing a killer lick on it. Love the song, love your guys' version of it. And there you have it, folks. Side B of our Ultimate Guitar Solos mixtape, which kicked off with Van Halen's Eruption and Eddie Van Halen, in case you didn't know. AC/DC's Whole Lotta Rosie, Angus Young. Queen's Dragon Attack, Brian May. Yes, I pivoted from Bohemian Rhapsody, but yeah, I had to flip that one. Richard Thompson's 52 Black Vincent, the acoustic version. Stray Cats Strut, Brian Setzer. Gene Vincent and his Blue Caps, Race with the Devil, Cliff Gallup. Stevie Ray Vaughan's Riviera Paradise. Roy Buchanan's Sweet Dreams. The Beatles' While My Guitar Gently Weeps, George Harrison. And Shooter Jennings, Matt Sorum, Michael Devin, Aubrey Richmond, and my guest this evening, Jesse Dayton, Baby Please Don't Go. Head over to myweeklymixtape.com to hear all the songs we've discussed in this mix through the playlist embedded on the episode page. Well, Jesse, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me on My Weekly Mixtape.
You got it, brother. Thanks for having me, and let's hang in real life sometime.
Oh, I'd love it, man. Thank you. And remember, mixtapers, you can find My Weekly Mixtape on almost all the social media haunts at My Weekly Mixtape. You can also head to myweeklymixtape.com to check out the full catalog of My Weekly Mixtape episodes. And if you like what you're hearing on the show, you can help me out by either telling a friend, leaving the show a 5-star review wherever you're tuning in, or becoming a Patreon mixtaper at patreon.com/My Weekly Mixtape. There you can enjoy ad-free episodes of the show, become a future guest, and so much more. That's all for this week. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, enjoy the tunes.
It's NFL draft season, and that means it's time to start thinking about fantasy football. FantasyPoints.com features industry-leading experts and prognosticators using proprietary hand-charted data to help you score more fantasy points. FantasyPoints.com is the place to go for whatever kind of fantasy football you play. Whether you play fantasy football, daily fantasy sports, or do a little bit of everything, Fantasy Points has the meticulously researched content to guide you to victory. And why wait for the fall? Fantasy Points also covers the new spring football league, the UFL. Join the guru, John Hansen, Scott Barrett, Joe Dolan, and other massive names in the fantasy football universe with an exclusive offer. Use code Pantheon for 15% off any Fantasy Points package, including the all-in package, with access to every article, tool, and data nugget that Fantasy Points has to offer. That's FantasyPoints.com and code Pantheon for 15% off at Fantasy Points. FantasyPoints.com, code Pantheon. Score more fantasy points.